The accusation that changed everything. A prison guard stands at a crossroads between judgment and understanding. Everyone saw guilt written across the inmate's face. But what happens when assumptions crumble beneath the weight of truth? Get ready for a story that will challenge everything you believe about judgment and redemption. And if you're moved by stories of unexpected truth, subscribe now to never miss transformative narratives like this one. Officer Marcus Webb had patrolled Cell Block D for 17 years, long enough to recognize patterns, to read faces, to know when someone was lying. That Tuesday morning, when he discovered $300 missing from the staff break room, his eyes immediately fell on prisoner 4729. Daniel Kern, a thin man with nervous hands who cleaned the administrative wing each morning under supervised release protocols. The evidence seemed irrefutable. Daniel had been alone in that corridor for precisely 12 minutes. The money had vanished during that window. Other guards nodded knowingly when Marcus presented his theory during the shift briefing. Another inmate succumbing to temptation. Another disappointment in a career filled with them. Marcus remembered Daniel's arrival 6 months earlier. Quiet, withdrawn, serving 18 months for check fraud. The kind of prisoner who kept his head down, who moved through the system like water through cracks, hoping to emerge unchanged on the other side. But theft was theft, and Marcus had procedures to follow. He found Daniel in the laundry facility, methodically folding prison-issued uniforms with unexpected precision. Each fold exactly measured, corners aligned with geometric accuracy. Marcus observed this ritualistic attention to detail with professional detachment, noting how Daniel's hands never trembled despite the officer's approaching footsteps echoing across concrete floors. "Kern, we need to talk," Marcus stated, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. Daniel turned slowly, his expression neither fearful nor defiant, something else entirely. Resignation, perhaps. Or was it understanding? Marcus couldn't immediately categorize it, and this uncertainty troubled him more than open hostility would have. "About the money, sir." Daniel's voice was steady, quiet. Marcus felt surprise register before he suppressed it. Guilty people typically feigned ignorance, manufactured confusion, constructed elaborate alibis. Daniel's direct acknowledgement suggested either foolish honesty or calculated strategy. "The $300 from the break room," Marcus confirmed, watching for micro-expressions, subtle tells developed over nearly 2 decades of interrogations. Daniel nodded once, setting down the uniform he'd been folding with that same meticulous care. "I know where it is, Officer Webb. But before we discuss that, I need you to understand something important. I need you to listen to why I couldn't tell anyone immediately, why silence was the only option I had." Marcus crossed his arms, professional skepticism firmly in place. Yet something in Daniel's measured tone, in his unflinching eye contact, created the smallest opening for doubt, for possibility, for truth that might exist beyond assumptions. The weight of silence. Sometimes the truth demands patience, even when every instinct screams for immediate answers. Daniel stood accused, silent by choice rather than guilt. What desperate circumstances could force an innocent man to remain quiet when speaking could set him free? This chapter reveals the complex web of loyalty and fear. And if you're captivated by these layers of human complexity, like and share this story to help others discover these profound truths. Marcus gestured toward the small office adjacent to the laundry facility, a windowless room containing a metal desk, 2 chairs, and the permanent smell of industrial detergent. Daniel followed without protest, his movements deliberate, controlled. The physical vocabulary of someone accustomed to navigating confined spaces without drawing attention. Once inside, Marcus closed the door but deliberately left it unlocked, a subtle signal that this conversation existed somewhere between interrogation and dialogue. He'd learned long ago that small gestures could shift entire interactions, could open pathways to truth that aggressive tactics permanently closed. "You have exactly 5 minutes to explain yourself before this becomes official," Marcus stated, settling into the chair behind the desk while Daniel remained standing. "And official means lockdown, investigation, extended sentence, you understand that?" And Daniel nodded, his hands clasped loosely before him, not ringing, not fidgeting, simply present. "The money belongs to Officer Patterson's daughter," he began, his voice low but clear. She's been dealing with something complicated, something dangerous. I overheard her conversation with her father 3 days ago when I was cleaning near his office. Marcus felt his professional skepticism sharpen. This sounded like the beginning of an elaborate fabrication, yet Daniel's delivery lacked the performative quality of constructed lies. No emotional manipulation, no dramatic pauses designed to generate sympathy. Patterson's daughter, Marcus repeated, thinking of James Patterson, the veteran guard who worked night shifts, whose family photos decorated his locker, including images of Sarah, his college-age daughter with bright eyes and an infectious smile. She's being threatened, Daniel continued, maintaining that steady, almost unsettling calm. By someone she trusted. Someone who has evidence of something she did. Something foolish, but not malicious. He's demanding money. $300 by Thursday. Or he releases information that could destroy her academic career. Maybe worse. Marcus leaned back, analyzing the narrative structure, searching for inconsistencies. And you know this how, exactly? Daniel's jaw tightened fractionally, the first visible sign of emotional strain. Because I heard Officer Patterson crying in his office at 2 a.m. I heard him on the phone with his daughter, heard her sobbing through the speaker, heard the whole terrible situation. And when he hung up, he put $300 in an envelope and left it in the break room with her name on it, planning to give it to her when she visited yesterday. The specificity created credibility, but Marcus pressed harder. Why would you take it then? Why not leave it alone? Because, Daniel said quietly, the wrong person found it first. The chain of consequences. One decision creates ripples that transform multiple lives in unexpected ways. Daniel had taken the money not to steal it, but to protect it, a distinction that would challenge Marcus's understanding of guilt and innocence. Who had found the envelope first? And what chain of events had Daniel set in motion? Keep reading to uncover the truth, and subscribe to ensure you experience every revelation in this extraordinary journey. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of a case growing more complex, details multiplying like fractures across ice. Who found it? He asked, his tone shifting from accusatory to investigative. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound carrying 17 years of careful observation that Marcus recognized, the exhalation of someone preparing to violate unwritten codes, to speak truths that could have severe consequences in an environment where information meant currency and vulnerability invited exploitation. Officer Richard Stokes, Daniel said, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. I saw him take the envelope from the break room around 6:15 yesterday morning. I was emptying trash containers in the hallway, partially hidden by the maintenance cart. He opened it, counted the money, read the note attached. Then he smiled. Not a good smile, Officer Webb. The kind that means someone sees opportunity in someone else's desperation. Marcus knew Stokes, a 15-year veteran with a reputation for cutting corners, for subtle cruelties disguised as protocol enforcement, for possessing information about inmates and staff that he wielded with strategic precision. Several complaints filed against him over the years, all dismissed for insufficient evidence, all leaving residue of suspicion that never quite crystallized into actionable proof. What did he do with it? Marcus asked, though part of him already anticipated the answer. He put it in his jacket pocket, Daniel replied. Then he went to make his rounds. I had perhaps 90 seconds to make a decision. Let him keep money that Officer Patterson desperately needed for his daughter, or intervene somehow. The narrative was developing coherence, but Marcus remained cautious. So you decided to steal it from Stokes? Daniel's expression shifted slightly, something resembling sad amusement crossing his features. I decided to retrieve it, Officer Webb. There's a difference, though the law might not recognize it. I know where Stokes keeps personal items during his shift, in his locker in the staff changing area. I have approximately 4 minutes of unsupervised access to that area when I clean the administrative offices each morning. 4 minutes when shift changes create gaps in observation. Marcus felt professional admiration competing with ethical concern. You broke into his locker. The lock is a simple 3-digit combination, Daniel confirmed without pride or shame. I've observed him opening it perhaps 30 times over 6 months. Pattern recognition becomes instinctive when you have nothing else to occupy your mind. 176. The same combination he uses for everything. I've noticed he writes it on documents sometimes without realizing, muscle memory transferring to unintended contexts. The level of detailed observation revealed intelligence and patience that transcended Marcus's initial assessment of this quiet inmate. And then? I took the envelope, placed it inside a legal textbook in the prison library, Section 12, Shelf 4, third book from the left. Constitutional Law and Criminal Procedure, specifically. A book almost nobody requests, because it's outdated, published in 1987, superseded by newer editions. Safe, hidden, waiting for the right moment to return it to Officer Patterson. Without creating questions I couldn't answer. Without exposing his daughter's situation to institutional scrutiny that might make everything worse. The moral complexity of right action. Sometimes doing the right thing requires wrong methods, creating ethical paradoxes that challenge simple definitions of justice. Marcus faced a decision that would test 17 years of professional certainty. Believe an inmate who had committed theft to prevent theft, or follow protocol that might punish protection and reward exploitation. What would you do when the rulebook fails humanity? Engage with this story by commenting your thoughts below, and subscribe to explore more narratives that challenge conventional wisdom. Marcus sat in silence for 37 seconds. He counted them internally, a habit developed during difficult deliberations when time itself became a tool for clarity. Daniel waited without fidgeting, without filling the silence with desperate elaboration, demonstrating the kind of patience that Marcus associated with truth rather than fabrication. "You're asking me to believe," Marcus finally said, "that you stole money to protect it. That you broke into a staff locker to retrieve something that didn't belong to you in order to return it to someone else. And that you did all this without informing any authority because you wanted to protect Officer Patterson's daughter from embarrassment or worse." Daniel nodded once. "I'm not asking you to believe anything, Officer Webb. I'm explaining what happened. What you do with that information determines what happens next. To me, to the money, to Officer Patterson's ability to help his daughter before Thursday's deadline. It's now Wednesday afternoon. Time matters." The subtle pressure of that temporal reality sharpened Marcus's focus. If Daniel's story held truth, then Patterson's daughter faced a threat with diminishing hours for resolution. But if this narrative constituted elaborate deception, then Marcus's belief would represent professional failure, would compromise his credibility, would potentially enable further misconduct. "Show me," Marcus said abruptly, standing from the desk. "Show me this textbook, this hidden envelope. We go to the library right now, together, and you demonstrate that what you're claiming has physical reality beyond words." Daniel's shoulders relaxed fractionally, a response suggesting relief rather than anxiety, another subtle indicator that pushed Marcus toward tentative belief. "I'll show you, but we need to be careful. If Officer Stokes notices unusual activity, if he suspects anything, he might remove the money himself or create complications that serve his interests rather than truth." They exited the small office, Marcus maintaining proper protocol distance as they walked through institutional corridors toward the prison library. Other inmates glanced up from various activities, card games, exercise, listless television watching, noting the unusual pairing but asking no questions, understanding that curiosity in this environment often carried costs. The library occupied a converted storage space, containing perhaps 2,000 books arranged on metal shelving units that created narrow aisles between sections. A single librarian, Mrs. Chen, supervised the space with weary dedication. Her presence more symbolic than functional, given the general disinterest most inmates showed toward reading materials beyond magazines and newspapers. "Research for my appeal," Daniel said quietly to Mrs. Chen, gesturing toward the legal section. She barely looked up, waving them forward with administrative indifference. Section 12 held outdated legal texts, their spines faded and cracked from age and neglect. Daniel moved directly to Shelf 4, his fingers finding the third book from the left without hesitation. Constitutional Law and Criminal Procedure, its cover bearing the institutional stamp of a law school library that had donated unwanted volumes years earlier. He removed the book carefully, opened it to approximately the middle, and there, pressed between pages discussing Fourth Amendment search and seizure precedents, lay a white envelope with Sarah written in uncertain handwriting across the front. Marcus felt the ground beneath his assumptions begin shifting. The test of character evidence can illuminate truth, but wisdom recognizes that evidence alone never tells complete stories. Marcus held the envelope, stood at the intersection of protocol and humanity, and understood that his next decision would define not just this situation, but his own character. How do we choose between systems that demand obedience and conscience that demands something more? Share this chapter with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to continue this profound exploration of moral courage. Marcus picked up the envelope with careful deliberation, noting the weight, the unsealed flap, the name written in handwriting that suggested emotional distress, letters slightly uneven, pressure inconsistent, the physical manifestation of a father's anguish. He opened it, counted $300 in mixed denominations, and found a small note written on the back of a deposit slip. Sarah, please be safe. This solves the immediate problem. We'll handle everything else together. Love, Dad. The intimate vulnerability of those words created uncomfortable intimacy, the sensation of witnessing private pain not meant for outside observation. Marcus carefully replaced the note, resealed the envelope, and looked at Daniel with recalibrated assessment. This doesn't prove you didn't steal it originally, Marcus said, though his tone lacked conviction. You could have taken it from the break room yourself, hidden it, and now you're manufacturing this story about Stokes to avoid punishment. Daniel absorbed this without defensiveness. That's true, Officer Webb. You're absolutely right that my narrative could constitute deception. But consider the logic. If I had stolen this money intending to keep it, why would I hide it in a library book instead of somewhere more secure, somewhere I could access privately? Why would I choose a location that requires Mrs. Chen's presence, that exists in a semi-public space with surveillance cameras? He gestured toward the ceiling corner where a security camera captured the library's main area in grainy monochrome. Marcus followed Daniel's gesture, noting the camera angle, calculating what it would and wouldn't record. The camera doesn't cover this specific section clearly. No, Daniel agreed, but it does record everyone who enters and exits the library. If you review yesterday's footage around 6:30 in the morning, you'll see me enter alone, stay approximately 8 minutes, and exit. No one else came in during that window. The timestamp will demonstrate I entered the library within 15 minutes of when you claim the money disappeared from the break room. The specificity continued building credibility, but Marcus pressed further. And if I review footage from the break room? You'll see me cleaning the corridor outside, Daniel said quietly. But the break room itself has no camera. Administration removed it 3 years ago. Ago after staff complained about feeling surveilled during rest periods. You'll have to take my word about what I observed through the partially open door, about Stokes taking the envelope. Unless... Daniel paused, considering something carefully before continuing. Unless you check Stokes's locker right now. If my story is fabrication, his locker should show no signs of recent disturbance, no indication that anyone accessed it this morning. But if I'm telling truth, there might be evidence. Scratches around the lock mechanism where my improvised pick created minor damage. Perhaps fibers from my cleaning cloth caught in the hinge. Small details, but physical reality leaves traces that lies cannot manufacture. Marcus studied Daniel's face, searching for calculation, for manipulation, for any sign that this represented sophisticated deception rather than uncomfortable truth. He found only steady patience and something approaching sadness, not the sadness of someone caught, but the sadness of someone forced to navigate corruption while maintaining integrity, forced to commit minor violation to prevent larger injustice. We're going to Stokes's locker, Marcus decided. And if what you're saying is true, if there's evidence supporting your account, then we have a more serious problem than simple theft. The confrontation of hidden corruption. Power corrupts most effectively when it operates beneath notice, when small violations accumulate into patterns that contaminate entire systems. Marcus and Daniel moved through institutional spaces toward a reckoning that would expose more than missing money. It would reveal the price of silence and the cost of speaking. Are you ready for the truth about how corruption takes root? Comment below what you think Marcus should do next, and subscribe to witness how this confrontation unfolds across the remaining chapters. They walked through corridors with shared purpose now. The dynamic between them shifted from adversarial to collaborative. though Marcus maintained professional distance, aware that this temporary alliance could evaporate under scrutiny, that his reputation balanced on the truthfulness of an inmate serving time for fraud. The staff locker room existed in a transitional space between cell blocks and administrative offices, a narrow area containing metal lockers, wooden benches, and the permanent smell of industrial cleaning products mixed with coffee and stress. This late in the afternoon, the room stood empty. Most day shift officers had already departed. Night shift personnel hadn't yet arrived, creating a window of privacy that felt simultaneously fortunate and ominous. Locker 47 bore Stokes's name on a strip of faded label tape. Marcus approached it with methodical caution, examining the combination lock without touching it, noting details he'd never previously considered relevant. The lock mechanism showed minor scratches around the dial, subtle scoring that could indicate either years of normal use or recent tampering with improvised tools. "You said 176, Marcus confirmed, glancing back at Daniel, who stood near the doorway, maintaining careful distance from direct involvement. "That's the combination I've observed him use," Daniel replied. "But I should mention, if you open his locker using that combination, it establishes that I've been watching him closely enough to know his personal security codes. That information alone might create consequences for me regardless of what we find inside." Marcus appreciated this acknowledgement of risk, this recognition that truth-seeking often carried costs for those who initiated it. He rotated the dial slowly, right to 1, left past 0 to 7, right to 6. The lock clicked open with mechanical precision. Inside, Stokes's locker revealed the accumulated debris of 15 years. Spare uniform shirts, protein bar wrappers, sports magazines, a framed photograph of himself receiving some departmental commendation, and a small black notebook tucked behind a stack of procedure manuals. Marcus removed the notebook carefully, opened it to reveal pages filled with handwritten entries. Names, dates, small notations that appeared innocuous individually, but collectively suggested something more systematic. Patterson, daughter situation, potential leverage. Inmate Morris, contraband cigarettes, weekly payment arranged. Guard Thompson, scheduling irregularity, covered in exchange for future consideration. The documentation of corruption, carefully maintained, transformed institutional dysfunction into visible evidence. Marcus felt anger rising, the particular fury that comes from discovering that cynicism was insufficient, that reality exceeded even practiced skepticism. "He's been cataloging leverage," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than Daniel, "building a network of minor compromises and quiet arrangements that give him power without official authority." Daniel nodded from the doorway. "That's why I couldn't report what I saw through normal channels, Officer Webb. If I had told any authority about the money, about Patterson's situation, it might have reached Stokes through institutional communication. He'd have known someone was watching him, known his leverage was compromised. Patterson's daughter would have faced exposure, and Stokes would have simply erased evidence and continued operating." Marcus photographed several pages of the notebook with his personal phone. Technically a violation of procedure, but some violations served justice while others undermined it. He replaced the notebook exactly as he'd found it, closed the locker, reset the combination lock. "We need to move carefully now," Marcus said, turning to face Daniel fully. "If we confront Stokes directly, he'll deny everything, claim the notebook is misunderstood, possibly destroy evidence. We need Patterson's corroboration, need to verify that his daughter is actually facing threats, that this isn't somehow more complicated than it appears." "Officer Patterson works night shift," Daniel reminded him. "He arrives at 10 o'clock tonight, 6 hours from now." 6 hours. Marcus calculated risks and possibilities, understood that every moment increased the chance that Stokes would notice disturbances, would activate defensive protocols that could collapse their fragile advantage. "Until then," Marcus decided, "you return to your regular routine, normal behavior, no indication that anything has changed. And Daniel." He paused, holding the inmate's gaze with unexpected respect. "Thank you for caring about something beyond yourself, for taking risks to protect someone you've never met." Daniel's expression remained measured, but something like gratitude flickered across his features before he nodded once and turned toward the door. Marcus watched him leave, then looked back at Locker 47, understanding that the next 6 hours would determine whether justice prevailed or whether institutional corruption proved too entrenched to challenge. The waiting game. Patience transforms time into either torture or tool, depending on purpose and perspective. Marcus spent 6 hours between discovery and action, each minute carrying the weight of potential failure. And Daniel returned to his cell, carrying the burden of hope that truth might, for once, overcome convenient narrative. How do people endure the space between knowing what's right and being able to act on it? If this story is resonating with you, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to ensure you experience the powerful conclusion. Marcus occupied those 6 hours with surface normalcy, concealing constant vigilance. He completed routine paperwork, responded to minor incidents with automatic professionalism, and monitored the prison's rhythm while his mind repeatedly returned to that notebook. Those carefully documented exploitations, the systematic corruption that had operated beneath institutional awareness. He checked surveillance footage from the library, confirming Daniel's timeline. The footage showed the inmate entering at 6:32 yesterday morning, remaining 8 minutes, exiting alone. Cross-referencing with break room corridor footage revealed Daniel cleaning the hallway at 6:17, his attention occasionally directed toward the break room's partially open door. The technical evidence supported Daniel's account without proving it absolutely, leaving Marcus in the uncomfortable space between belief and certainty. Daniel, meanwhile, returned to routine with disciplined normalcy. He completed laundry assignments, ate dinner in the cafeteria with minimal interaction, returned to his cell during evening lockdown. Other inmates noticed nothing unusual, no indication that this quiet man serving time for check fraud had initiated a chain of events that might expose corruption, reaching through multiple levels of institutional hierarchy. In his cell, Daniel lay on the thin mattress and considered the possibility that his intervention might fail, that Marcus might choose protocol over justice, that Stokes's carefully constructed network might prove too resilient to dismantle. He'd learned during 6 months of incarceration that hope required careful management, that expectations created vulnerabilities, that prison exploited mercilessly. Yet he'd acted anyway, had chosen risk over safety, because Officer Patterson's daughter deserved protection, because silence enabled corruption, because maintaining integrity in degrading circumstances was perhaps the only meaningful form of resistance available. These thoughts occupied his mind as afternoon shifted into evening, as the prison settled into night shift routines. At 9:58, Marcus positioned himself near the staff entrance, waiting for Patterson's arrival. The older guard appeared precisely on schedule, his appearance revealing the accumulated weight of his daughter's crisis. Dark circles under eyes, shoulders carrying invisible burden, the physical manifestation of parental anguish. "James, I need to speak with you privately," Marcus said quietly, his tone conveying urgency without alarm. "Before you begin your rounds, it concerns your daughter." Patterson's expression shifted immediately from weary routine to sharp concern. "What about Sarah? What's happened?" They moved to an empty conference room, Marcus closing the door before explaining carefully, methodically, the entire sequence of events: the missing money, Daniel's observation, Stokes's theft, the envelope hidden in the library, the notebook documenting systematic exploitation. He presented evidence through his phone, photographs of those damning pages, watching Patterson's face transform from concern to anger to something approaching despair. "He's been using my daughter's situation for leverage," Patterson said quietly, his voice containing dangerous calm. "I put that money in the break room yesterday morning because Sarah was coming to visit yesterday evening. I was going to give it to her discreetly, help her handle the threat without making it official, without creating records that might follow her. And Stokes just took it, saw an opportunity, and took it." "There's more," Marcus continued, explaining Daniel's intervention, the careful retrieval, the decision to hide rather than immediately report, the protection of Patterson's privacy while ensuring the money remained available. Patterson absorbed this information with visible effort. "An inmate I've never directly interacted with did this? Took these risks to help my daughter?" "He said he overheard your phone conversation," Marcus confirmed. "Said he heard you crying in your office, heard Sarah through the speaker, heard enough to understand the situation and care about its resolution." The human complexity of that statement hung between them, the reminder that inmates remained human, that punishment didn't erase capacity for compassion, that institutional categories obscured more than they revealed. What do we do now? Patterson asked. The plan of strategic justice requires not just courage, but strategy. Not just truth, but careful orchestration of its revelation. Marcus and Patterson designed a response that would expose corruption while protecting those who had risked safety to reveal it. A delicate operation requiring precision, timing, and faith that systems could still serve integrity when properly leveraged. Are you ready to see how careful planning transforms evidence into accountability? Engage by liking this chapter, and subscribe to witness the culmination of this extraordinary story. They spent 43 minutes developing a plan that balanced institutional protocol with practical reality, that protected Daniel from retaliation, while ensuring Stokes couldn't dismiss evidence as fabrication or misunderstanding. Patterson's 17 years of experience combined with Marcus's investigative methodology created a strategy that felt simultaneously risky and necessary. We document everything formally, Marcus outlined, but we frame the initial discovery as routine investigation rather than targeted surveillance. I report the missing money through official channels first thing tomorrow morning, 8 hours from now, when day shift command is available. That establishes timeline and creates official record. Patterson nodded, following the logic. While you're doing that, I retrieve the envelope from the library. Daniel told you exact location, correct? Section 12, Shelf 4, Constitutional Law and Criminal Procedure, third book from left, Marcus confirmed. You retrieve it as if you're simply recovering your own property based on information received. No mention yet of how we learned its location. And Stokes? Patterson's jaw tightened as he said the name. Stokes's notebook creates complications, Marcus admitted. We can't officially know about it without admitting we accessed his locker without warrant or permission. But we can report observing suspicious behavior, request formal investigation through internal affairs. Once they're examining him officially, they'll discover the notebook through legitimate channels. Patterson considered this carefully. What about Daniel? His role in all this? He broke into a staff locker. He withheld information about a theft investigation. He technically committed multiple infractions even though his intentions were protective. This question cut to the moral center of their dilemma. By strict protocol, Daniel had violated rules that demanded punishment regardless of motivation. But strict protocol had also enabled Stokes's corruption, had created an environment where doing right required doing wrong, where integrity necessitated violation. I'm going to recommend commendation rather than discipline, Marcus said quietly. I'll document that prisoner Kern observed suspicious behavior, reported it to me through proper channels when he felt safe doing so, and provided information that led to recovery of stolen property and identification of staff misconduct. I'll omit certain details about methodology, focus on results and intentions. That's a significant risk to your reputation, Patterson observed. If anyone investigates thoroughly, they'll find inconsistencies. They'll question the timeline. They'll potentially uncover that you're protecting an inmate who violated multiple regulations. Marcus met the older guard's eyes with steady conviction. Some risks serve values more important than career protection. Daniel did what he did because he cared about your daughter despite having no connection to her, no obligation beyond human decency. The least I can do is ensure that decency doesn't result in additional punishment. Patterson's expression shifted, something like gratitude mixing with respect. And Sarah? My daughter's situation with this person threatening her? Once we've secured the money, once you've given it to her, that's a personal matter, Marcus replied. But I'd recommend she consider reporting the threat to campus authorities. Blackmail is criminal, regardless of what mistake she made initially. Sometimes the fear of exposure carries more power than the exposure itself, and refusing to pay might eliminate the leverage entirely. They spent another 20 minutes refining details, anticipating complications, building contingency responses. At 11:47, they separated. Patterson to begin his rounds, Marcus to head home for a few hours of sleep before initiating their carefully orchestrated plan. Before leaving, Marcus made one additional decision. He visited Cell Block D, requested Daniel be brought to a consultation room, a late-night meeting that would raise no suspicions given Marcus's investigative role. Daniel entered the small room with characteristic calm, though his eyes betrayed tension, the recognition that this summons could mean either resolution or disaster. Tomorrow morning, Marcus said without preamble. "This becomes official. Patterson has confirmed your account. We're moving forward with exposing Stokes and recovering the money. But I need you to understand something clearly. You will face questions about your knowledge, about your observations, about how you knew where to look and what to find. You need to be very careful about what you say and how you say it." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're protecting me by omitting certain details." "I'm documenting the truth in a way that emphasizes results over methodology," Marcus corrected. "That's not quite the same thing, but it's close enough to create ethical ambiguity. The question is whether you can live with that ambiguity, whether you can accept protection that relies partially on strategic omission." Daniel considered this for several moments before responding. "Officer Webb, I'm serving 18 months for check fraud because I made desperate decisions during desperate circumstances. I understand the difference between legal and right, between protocol and justice. If you're offering me a version of truth that protects while still serving justice, I accept that gift with gratitude and without illusion that it's anything other than mercy disguised as procedure." The sophisticated understanding in that response reminded Marcus that intelligence and wisdom existed independent of circumstance, that institutional categories revealed nothing about human capability. "Get some sleep," Marcus said quietly. "Tomorrow might be complicated. The unraveling of careful deception. Dawn brings either justice or disillusionment, and which one emerges depends entirely on courage applied to evidence, on willingness to challenge systems that prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths." Marcus initiated formal procedures that would either expose corruption or destroy his credibility, and Daniel waited in his cell, understanding that sometimes the cost of integrity is measured in vulnerability. What happens when truth finally confronts institutional power? Comment your predictions below, and subscribe to discover the resolution of this gripping narrative. Marcus arrived at the prison at 6:43 in the morning, 3 hours before his official shift, carrying documentation that would transform private knowledge into institutional investigation. He filed official reports with Day Shift Command, explaining the discovery of missing money, the information received from a confidential source, the subsequent recovery plan involving Officer Patterson retrieving property from the library. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Day Shift Commander, reviewed the reports with the practiced skepticism of someone who had navigated institutional politics for 27 years. "You're saying an inmate reported this? Reported that another officer stole money?" "I'm saying I received information from a confidential source during routine investigation," Marcus clarified, using language carefully calibrated to remain technically truthful while strategically vague. "That information proved accurate. The envelope is being retrieved now from the location specified. The question is, what additional investigation is warranted regarding how staff property disappeared from a secure area?" Chen studied him carefully, recognizing layers of unspoken complexity. "And you believe this warrants internal affairs involvement?" "I believe patterns of misconduct deserve formal examination," Marcus replied. "I've observed Officer Stokes exhibiting behavior that suggests possible ethical violations. Nothing definitive, but enough to recommend professional investigation." The bureaucratic language created distance from accusation while establishing grounds for inquiry. Chen nodded slowly, making notations that would initiate processes beyond Marcus's control, processes that would either validate his concerns or expose them as unfounded, damaging his credibility permanently. While this official machinery engaged, Patterson entered the library at 7:11, retrieving the envelope from exactly where Daniel had hidden it. Mrs. Chen barely glanced up as he removed the outdated legal textbook, discovered the money, and documented the recovery with timestamp photographs that would serve as evidence. At 7:37, Internal Affairs received formal request for investigation into Officer Richard Stokes regarding possible ethical violations and misuse of institutional access. The request included general observations but no specific accusations, allowing investigators to develop their own independent findings. Stokes arrived for his shift at 8 o'clock, unaware that multiple institutional processes were converging around his carefully maintained corruption. He opened locker 47 with his usual combination, 176, and found his notebook exactly where he'd left it. No indication that anyone had discovered his documentation of leverage and exploitation. But within 3 hours, Internal Affairs investigators requested access to that same locker as part of routine investigation prompted by anonymous concerns. Stokes could refuse, but refusal would generate suspicions that might prove more damaging than cooperation. He consented with apparent confidence, standing aside as investigators cataloged his locker's contents. They found the notebook within 4 minutes. Within 6 minutes, they were photographing its pages, documenting the systematic record of institutional exploitation. Within 11 minutes, Stokes was being escorted to an interview room, his expression shifting from confidence to calculation to the beginnings of panic. Marcus watched this unfold from administrative distance, maintaining professional detachment while internally acknowledging satisfaction. Justice moved slowly through institutional channels, but it moved when people chose to initiate motion, when individuals decided that comfortable stability mattered less than ethical accountability. Patterson called his daughter at 9:47, confirming he had recovered the money, arranging to deliver it when she visited later that day. The relief in his voice carried through the phone connection, the particular gratitude of a parent able to protect his child from immediate harm. And Daniel, confined to his cell during routine morning lockdown, heard nothing official about these developments. But he observed increased activity in administrative areas, noticed the subtle tensions that indicated something significant occurring beyond prisoner awareness. He waited with patient discipline, understanding that outcomes existed beyond his control now, that he'd done what he could do and the rest belonged to larger forces. At 2:37 that afternoon, Lieutenant Chen requested Marcus's presence in her office. He entered expecting either commendation or censure, prepared for whichever judgment his actions had generated. "Your confidential source," Chen began without preamble, "was prisoner 4729, Daniel Kern. Don't bother denying it. The timeline makes that obvious, and I reviewed surveillance footage that confirms he had access to necessary areas during relevant windows." Marcus held her gaze steadily, accepting responsibility. "Yes, ma'am. Daniel Kern provided information that proved accurate and led to recovery of stolen property and identification of staff misconduct." Chen leaned back in her chair, studying him with unreadable expression. "He also violated multiple regulations in obtaining that information. By protocol, he should face disciplinary action." "By protocol," Marcus agreed carefully. "But protocol also suggests discretion when violations serve larger justice, when punishment would create perverse incentives that discourage prisoners from reporting staff misconduct." Several seconds of evaluative silence followed before Chen nodded fractionally. "I'm recommending that prisoner Kern receive commendation for assistance in investigation and recovery of stolen property. No mention of methodology, focus entirely on results and cooperation with authorities. Do you have any objection to that recommendation, Officer Webb?" Marcus felt tension releasing from shoulders he hadn't realized were raised. "No objection, Lieutenant. I believe that represents appropriate recognition of his actions." "Good," Chen said. "Because we're also terminating Officer Stokes' employment effective immediately, referring his case to criminal authorities for possible prosecution, and initiating comprehensive review of staff conduct over the past 5 years. Your willingness to pursue uncomfortable investigation potentially prevented more serious corruption. That deserves recognition too. Commendation and validation, official acknowledgement that choosing difficult truth over comfortable lies sometimes resulted in institutional support rather than punishment." Marcus accepted this outcome with quiet gratitude and immediate planning for his next responsibility, informing Daniel that his risk had generated consequences worth the cost. The transformation of understanding. True justice transforms everyone it touches, creating ripples of change that extend far beyond immediate resolution. Marcus returned to Daniel's cell carrying news that would alter the inmate's remaining sentence, and both men discovered that unexpected connection between guard and prisoner could illuminate truths about human dignity that institutions often obscure. This is the conclusion that will stay with you long after you finish reading. If this story has moved you, share it widely, subscribe for more transformative narratives, and carry forward the lesson that seeing truth requires looking beyond assumptions. Marcus requested Daniel be brought to a private consultation room at 4:15 that afternoon, the formal request creating no unusual notice given his ongoing investigation role. When Daniel entered, his expression maintained that characteristic calm, but his eyes revealed anticipation, the recognition that this meeting would determine the practical consequences of his decision to intervene. "Sit down, Daniel," Marcus said, his tone carrying warmth that would have seemed impossible during their initial confrontation just 2 days earlier. 2 days that felt like weeks. that had compressed months of revelation into condensed experience. Daniel sat carefully, hands folded on the table, posture suggesting neither hope nor despair, merely acceptance of whatever outcome Marcus's words would deliver. "Officer Stokes has been terminated," Marcus began directly, watching Daniel's reaction carefully. "Internal Affairs discovered his notebook, documented his pattern of exploitation and corruption, referred his case for criminal investigation. He's done, finished as a corrections officer, likely facing charges for theft and blackmail and misuse of authority." Daniel's expression shifted slightly, relief mixing with something more complex. Not quite triumph, more like validation that corruption could, occasionally, face accountability. "Officer Patterson recovered the money from the library where you hid it," Marcus continued. "He's already given it to his daughter, who's using it to resolve her immediate situation and considering legal action against the person threatening her. She doesn't know your name, doesn't know the specifics of how the money was protected, but her father wanted me to convey profound gratitude for your intervention." "That's good," Daniel said quietly. "That's what mattered. That she got help. That the situation resolved without making everything worse." Marcus nodded, appreciating the genuine selflessness in that response. "But there's more, Daniel. Lieutenant Chen recommended that you receive formal commendation for assistance in investigation. No disciplinary action for methodology. Recognition instead for results and willingness to cooperate with authorities in exposing staff misconduct." Daniel absorbed this information with visible surprise, the first unguarded emotional response Marcus had witnessed from him. "Commendation? I broke into a staff locker. I withheld information during active investigation. I violated multiple—" "You protected someone you'd never met from exploitation," Marcus interrupted gently. "You took risks to ensure justice prevailed over corruption. You demonstrated exactly the kind of ethical reasoning and moral courage that this institution should encourage rather than punish. The commendation acknowledges that truth." Several moments of silence followed while Daniel processed implications. A commendation in his prison record would affect parole considerations, would demonstrate rehabilitation and positive conduct, would potentially reduce his sentence through accumulated good behavior credits. 18 months could become 14, could become 12. Time measured now in possibility rather than just endurance. "Why?" Daniel finally asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. "Why did you believe me, Officer Webb? Why did you risk your reputation to pursue this when you could have simply followed protocol, investigated me instead of Stokes, taken the path that protected your career?" Marcus considered this question carefully, recognizing its importance, understanding that his answer mattered beyond immediate circumstances. "Because I've worked in corrections for 17 years, Daniel, and in that time I've developed fairly reliable instincts about when people are lying and when they're telling uncomfortable truths. But more than that, because you were willing to remain silent when speech would have created more harm, willing to accept suspicion directed at you to protect someone else's privacy, willing to trust that eventually truth would matter more than convenient narrative." He paused, meeting Daniel's eyes directly. "And because you reminded me that my job isn't just enforcing rules, it's serving justice, even when justice requires creative interpretation of rules, even when doing right looks like doing wrong to people who only see surfaces." Daniel nodded slowly, something like gratitude evident in his expression. "Thank you, Officer Webb. For listening, for investigating, for choosing to see beyond categories and protocols." "Thank you," Marcus replied, "for demonstrating that integrity survives even in circumstances designed to erode it, that compassion persists even when showing it carries costs, that someone serving time for check fraud can teach a 17-year veteran about ethical courage." They sat together in that small consultation room for several more minutes, two men separated by institutional roles, but connected by shared recognition that human complexity transcended simple classification, that justice required constant vigilance against corruption's gravity, that sometimes the most profound transformations occurred in the spaces between punishment and rehabilitation. When Daniel returned to his cell that evening, other inmates noticed subtle change in his demeanor. Not pride exactly, but quiet certainty, the physical manifestation of someone who had acted according to conscience and found the universe, for once, responding with something resembling fairness. Marcus completed his shift with renewed purpose, understanding that the job he'd performed for 17 years held meaning beyond routine enforcement, that every interaction carried potential for either diminishing or honoring human dignity, that choosing which potential to activate defined not just outcomes, but character itself. Officer Patterson worked his night shift with lightened burden, grateful his daughter had received help from an unexpected source, contemplating the intricate web of connection that allowed a prisoner he'd never directly encountered to protect his family with more loyalty than a colleague who'd worked beside him for years. And somewhere in the expanding ripples of these connected decisions, Lieutenant Chen initiated broader reforms, examining institutional cultures that enabled corruption, developing new protocols for reporting staff misconduct, creating channels that protected whistleblowers whether they wore uniforms or prison-issued clothing. Justice, when it finally arrived, transformed more than immediate circumstances. It altered understanding, challenged assumptions, reminded everyone involved that categories existed to serve humanity rather than constrain it, that rules gained legitimacy by serving truth rather than demanding blind obedience. The story of the prison guard who thought the inmate was a thief became, ultimately, a story about seeing clearly, about choosing courage over comfort, about recognizing that wisdom sometimes arrives from unexpected sources, and about understanding that the most profound truths often hide beneath surfaces we're too quick to judge. Daniel would serve his remaining sentence with accumulated commendations that eventually reduced his time, would emerge with reputation intact and lessons learned about both human fallibility and human capacity for redemption. Marcus would continue working in corrections with deepened appreciation for complexity, with sharpened instincts about distinguishing performance from authenticity, with renewed commitment to serving justice rather than just enforcing rules. And every person touched by these events carried forward the fundamental lesson that truth requires courage to pursue, wisdom to recognize, and humility to accept when it arrives from sources we didn't expect, wearing faces we'd too quickly dismissed, speaking from places we'd wrongly assumed held nothing worth hearing. The end of this story, then, is really a beginning, an invitation to see more clearly, to judge less quickly, to recognize that every human being carries hidden depths that surface only when we choose to look beyond convenient assumptions, only when we decide that understanding matters more than categorizing, only when we remember that justice serves humanity best when it remains humble enough to admit that rules, however necessary, can never fully capture the infinite complexity of human moral reasoning navigating impossible circumstances with nothing but conscience as compass.